Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we have another book review, as you've seen probably from the thumbnail, and we're reviewing The Dragonbone Chair by Ted Williams. Now, before I start with our usual spiel, I'll just have a small announcement, which is I will not be posting any videos throughout the Christmas New Year's period, just to rest a bit, recharge my batteries, be able to come up with more ideas for videos, and just, rest a bit for the holidays. I'll be back as soon as the year starts with our usual schedule on Thursdays and Sundays. And meanwhile, if you have any recommendations, ideas of videos that you want to see, comment down below. And let's keep going. So we are back with book reviews. We are reviewing The Dragonbone Chair by Ted Williams, which is the first book of a trilogy called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Many of you might have heard of this trilogy since it was quite famous in the booktube sphere around a year ago, more or less, and it was even picked up by the Broken Binding to be one of their special editions of their fantasy subscription. This is an epic fantasy book that was written in 1988, so yes, it is an oldie, but considered by many as one of the big classics of fantasy. On Goodreads, this book has been able to gather over 77,000 ratings, and it has an average score 3.97 at the moment of this review. Now, as I keep saying, 397 is probably not the best score, considering that in the fantasy realms, usually Goodreads has scores, or what we consider a good score for fantasy on Goodreads is above a 4. Usually they sit on 4.2 if they're good. Anything beyond that is really good. Anything below that is okay. Anything below 4, maybe not the best. But let's see what I think about this. Like I said, if you're curious what this edition is, this is the Broken Binding. It has a lot of really good illustrations. I was missing the word. And especially with the cover, I love this cover. It looks very epic with the Dragonbone Chair, but even inside it has plenty of other illustrations, all very relevant to scenes that happen in the book. The edge is a bit simple, it's just a sword. If you've read the book, you know what this sword is. However, I wish there was something more epic that joined all the spines together, because there are 4 books since the Broken Binding split the last book into 2, and there are some English editions that do that as well, because it's just a really big book. I mean, just this one alone is, I think, around 900 pages on this edition, so it would be really, really big if they joined the last 2 books into the real one. And let's start with our housekeeping item, which is the synopsis. I'm going to narrate the synopsis to you, just so that you can get a sense of what this book is about if you've never heard of it. And if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, if you're allergic to them, you're going to get an anaphylactic reaction from just hearing anything related to it. Skip to the next timestamp. It's just, you'll start right on to the review, onto our first category, which is plot. Otherwise, stick around and listen to my voice. The war fueled by the powers of dark sorcery is about to engulf the peaceful land of Ostenard. For Prester John, the High King lies dying, and with his death, the Storm King, the undead ruler of the elf-like city, seizes the chance to regain his lost realm through a pact with the newly ascended king. Knowing the consequences of this bargain, the king's younger brother joins with a small, scattered group of scholars, the League of the Scroll, to confront the true danger threatening Ostenard. Simon, a kitchen boy from the royal castle, unknowingly apprenticed to a member of this league, will be sent on a quest that offers the only hope of salvation, a deadly riddle concerning long-lost swords of power. Compelled by fate and perilous magics, he must leave the only home he's ever known and face enemies more terrifying than Ostenard has ever seen, even as the land itself begins to die. Alright, that is all for synopsis, and since we don't have to look at previous scores for the series, since the series is just starting, we can move on to our categories, starting with plot. Alright, so starting off with plot, what can I say about it? And the first thing I'm going to say, and this will probably be a common thread throughout the review, is that this book shows its time. It shows when it was published. If you read the synopsis, then you have a sense already of the plot. If you haven't, this might be also a spoiler, so you might not want to listen. But we basically follow Simon, a boy who is very young, lives in a castle, and he witnesses the king dying and the new king arising, and so far so good. However, the plot doesn't really develop much past that. Yes, we have the king that wants to govern and wants to have a tyrannical type of rule, and the young brother trying to battle that. But yeah, although the premise looks good, the plot itself doesn't seem very deep. It's this, and it doesn't evolve beyond that. Understand that because maybe this book was written in 1988, back then it might have been revolutionary as a plot to have this family influence into it, and also the few elements, the fantastical elements added. However, in today's day and age, I think it was a bit boring and a bit predictable. This is not to say that all books are boring, or they're all predictable, or they're all very lengthy. No, I don't think that at all. For example, Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time, both these were written before the 2000s, and they're amazing books. And I think they are dripping with originality, with rich plots as well. And I mean, Wheel of Time, I understand that the first book, the plot is not that original if you've read the Lord of the Rings. However, books 2, 3, beyond, they become super original. And even the Eye of the World, the first book, has some very original components to it. whereas this one, in comparison, doesn't feel that original. It feels fantastical, but just that classic fantasy of the 80s or 90s, that very basic, I would say. And I think the plot twists that were supposed to be surprising in this book ended up just being predictable, and therefore it was just, okay, we're doing this. I mean, I could see this coming from a mile away, but it's fine. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. And I think I'm being generous here. I think there were parts where I was feeling more like a 2 for this category, but I think overall, and taking into account when it was written, it kind of deserves a 3. But I really hope that the next 2 books improve on this, because if the plot doesn't move beyond this point, it'll be very, very disappointing. Alrighty, so we've talked about plot, let's talk about characters now. So the plot wasn't that great, what about the characters? To which I'll ask you, what characters? We mostly follow Simon, I would say like 95% of the time, and then we have some side characters that accompany him, but never really get developed. They are pretty much there to just support the main character, which is unfortunate because I think they had a lot of potential to be developed into interesting secondary characters, interesting arcs that they could have with interacting with our main character and with the plot overall. But unfortunately, we just have the typical stereotypes of that time, which is the funny sidekick, or the magical creature, or the villainous sorcerer, or the girl that our hero eventually falls in love and potentially marries with. The positive thing I can say about this category is that at least Simon, our main character, does get some development. Is not amazing, don't expect any of that. You won't get, for example, Brandon Sanderson level of development. It'll be very superficial, but there is more than with our side characters. I can see a difference between the start Simon and the end Simon, so I can see that there was some development, even though it wasn't that much. But yeah, I definitely wish that we could have seen that for all of the characters and not only for Simon. So for this category, I'm gonna give a 3 out of 5. Alrighty. Now, what about world building? This is the category I think the book did its best, although it didn't do amazingly. It didn't surpass my expectations whatsoever. It just surpassed a bit the other categories. And why is that? Well, I think the world was well built. It feels real. It doesn't really have a lot of magic, and the magic it has is soft magic. But at the same time, I think it has history and other elements that I could see being original at the time of its writing. I actually noticed some similarities between this book and the series written by John Gwynne with The Faithful and the Fallen. I don't know if they had any relationship whatsoever, if John Gwynne ever read Tad Williams or if he got inspired by it, but I could see how there were elements that were very similar in some aspects. However, I did enjoy John Gwynne's portrayal of it a lot more than I did for Tad Williams. And what I mean by this is more or less like the magic that was happening, certain weapons that existed, but yeah, not a lot of elements, just a few scattered here and there. However, one of the things I need to mention is the magic system, because there is not really a magic system. The magic is very soft, it's very hand-wavy, and because of that, it allows for a few Deus Ex Machina situations to happen. And I've explained what this is in previous reviews, but Deus Ex Machina is a plot device where our heroes get saved by some miracle almost, and it's not really by the circumstances of the plot or their characters or whatever. It's like suddenly something happens that saves them. And that can be very unfulfilling. It can feel a bit frustrating when it happens because it feels like the author simply didn't have any other explanation or way around it. And so he just created a fake god to make a miracle. And in this case, the magic feels a bit like that. It just saves our heroes at the right time just because, and when we didn't really have any sense of that magic before. I know that Lord of the Rings based their magic in the books as well. It's very soft with Gandalf. However, it doesn't feel like Gandalf always shows up at the end to save, even though he does that sometimes, and it feels a bit more set up for it. And I also need to mention the dream world, which was a component that I enjoyed. I think, or if there was any inspiration that Robert Jordan took from Tad Williams about this dream world to create Talaran Riyadh in The Wheel of Time, I think it would have been a cool link that existed, and I think there were similarities enough for that link to possibly exist. But yeah, it was just a fun detail there. But anyways, I'm gonna give this category a 4 out of 5. And moving to writing style, which wasn't great either. I feel like I'm just trashing this book, but I mean, there were some positives to it. Writing style wasn't one of them. Or at least the writing style wasn't agreeing with my taste, which I think is a fair way of saying this. I think the prose has nothing wrong with it. It does follow the template of that time. If you look at J.R.R. Tolkien, Robert Jordan, they all write with a lot of descriptions, and this book is no exception. And of course, this writing also doesn't focus much on character development, but more on the plot of exploring and going on adventures. However, some of the tools that the writer used to write this book weren't the best in my opinion. One of the things is there is a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. And what do I mean by this? One of the most typical tools that writers say or writers use is show, not tell. This means when you're having a character do something, actually show them doing that something instead of saying, oh, they went and did that. Just like, or they went and fought a battle and the swords clashed, blah, blah. No, just say that the character is going and is battling in the moment and what they're feeling and whatsoever. So there was a lot of telling and not really showing, which in itself makes things more boring. And then the other thing is there was the trope of the eavesdropping, when a character is suddenly in a situation where they can eavesdrop a conversation that they shouldn't hear. And Simon happened to encounter this situation just a few too many times, and to the point where I was like, geez, how many times are you just going to bump into a situation where you can suddenly eavesdrop and get important information out of it? So there's these two things. Aside from that, I think the action scenes were good, engaging, but I do think that the pacing of the story is quite average. And that is because the plot isn't very dynamic, so it just feels that literally our hero is just going from place A to B to C to D, and there's a very linear trajectory there. And of course there are sometimes some side plots that happen, but they're not big or super relevant, or they don't lead to any development of the characters, so they don't feel very big in itself. And because of that, everything is very linear, and there's no peaks or valleys of excitement or duller moments. And because of that, it becomes boring. So for this category, I'm also giving a 3 out of 5. And reaching our final category, which is enjoyment. Now, based on everything I've said so far, I don't think it will be very hard to know that I'm not going to give the best score on enjoyment for this book. I mean, I was very excited to read this book when I picked it up because, again, last year I heard so many things about it. The cover looks amazing. The illustrations inside look amazing as well. So I was like, this is epic fantasy. I love epic fantasy. Let's go and let's have just a fun old ride. And then I was reading it, and roughly like 20% through the book, I started thinking, when is this going to really move on and become more exciting? And also, when was this book written? Because it definitely feels like pre-2000s. Then, of course, I went to check, and lo and behold, it was written in 1988, so checks out. And so as I kept reading, my enjoyment kept decreasing bit by bit because it was just getting quite slow and hard to develop, and the characters weren't that great and all of that. And so by, I would say, the last 30%, it was really hard to keep reading. It was definitely not the type of book where I find excuses to read. It was more the type of book where I find excuses not to read this one and go read some of the other books I have. But of course, I ended up finishing it because I also had the drive of like, maybe at the end it'll get better, maybe there will be a big plot twist that will surprise me and will lead to the next books being better, which, I mean, I can't say that it was 100% that. It was okay at the end, but still nothing that would make me be like, whoa, yes, let's pick up the next one right away. So for this category, I'm gonna give it 2+ out of 5. But enough of me berating this book. I think I've done that enough. Let's refresh our scores. So we have 3 for plot, 3 for characters, 4 for world building, 3 for writing style, and a 2+ for enjoyment, which gives us a final score of 3 out of 5. I know it's quite low. I think it's probably the lowest score I gave this year, which, I mean, it's still pretty good if I gave the lowest was a 3, but it's sad that it happened with this book, which I had a lot of expectations for. But yeah, I think, unfortunately, this is one of those relic books that hasn't aged very well through time, and it's just hard to read because of all the tropes that have been so well done since then, and also transformed into new tropes since then, that this book kind of, it's a relic. But I mean, if you enjoy classical fantasy, you might still enjoy this. If you enjoyed those type of older books in fantasy, kind of like Lord of the Rings or The Dragon something written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Chapman, which I cannot remember the series, but I'll put an image somewhere around here so you can see. Those are also books that are very classical fantasy, and you might enjoy this one if you like those. It might take me some time to pick up the second one because I definitely need some breather in between, and I'll be reading other more exciting things. Hopefully soon I'll pick up the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because I'm quite excited to read that, and I will announce on the channel when I read it, because some of you want to do a buddy read, so we'll do that. But the one thing that I need to ask you as well is, have you read the second book, and does it improve or not? Comment down below so that I go with my expectations set where they should be. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I shall be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays. And of course, have a Merry Christmas, have a beautiful start of the year, and I hope you get all the books that you want, of course, and that your next year is just full of good reads. Okay, see ya.